How late is too late to start a lawn? We're gonna cover that in the establishment phase, but you can do it whenever, really, if you really want to. You're gonna have to just probably give it a lot more water, Michael, to keep it really moist for germination. It's easier to do it for a cool season grass anyway, on the tail ends of the season. Warm season grasses, you can start in the heat of the season a little bit easier. And it also kind of depends if you're seeding or sodding. It's going to be harder to get seed going once it starts to get pretty hot. So it can be done, just kind of depends on how much you want to water it. And it looks like it's going to be a hot year. Water shortages are a thing. They absolutely are. Pueblo West is under voluntary water restrictions right now, I have been made aware of. So any specific recommendations? Yeah, I mean, we're going to definitely go over scheduling your irrigation. And I know Pueblo West is asking people to only water, I think, 2 or 3 days a week. Don't quote me on that. So yeah, just going deep, watering deeply when you are able to water on those 2-3 days a week, and really giving it a good soaking on those days is a good thing to do when we are under water shortages and it's very hot. Another thing is on your off days, and I think I have this in my presentation coming up, but on your off days, if you are seeing that your lawn's just really struggling, even like a 2-minute, just quick turn your system on for just a couple minutes and just wet it can really help. So those are some recommendations for times when we might not be able to water quite as much. And any other questions that come up, type them in the chat and we will definitely be taking more breaks. Okay. So let's talk about establishment. Now this section is kind of assuming you want to start a brand new lawn, get it going. You're going to completely take it down to the dirt and establish it from there. And you have basically the two options: you can seed or you can sod. Okay. So let's start off with seeding. So seeding cool season grasses such as, your fescues, ryegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, late summer is going to be the best time to do that. It's also possible in the early spring, but we prefer to recommend late summer because you're going to deal with less weed issues as you start to water a lot to get those seeds going. You tend to get more weeds if you do it in the spring than if you're doing it in the late summer, because you're kind of getting into fall and some things aren't going to really be coming up anymore. And also you get that, rather than starting off cooler and then kind of getting hotter as it goes on, you start off hot, the warm soil is able to help the seeds germinate, and then it kind of cools down and lets that grass really get established. So late summer's best for a cool season grass. Like I said, you definitely can do it whenever. It just really depends on how much water you're willing to put on, because you got to keep it moist. And then as far as warm season grasses, seeding them specifically, May or June is the best. So right about now is a great time to go ahead and seed a warm season grass like your buffalo or your blue grandma. Prior to seeding, of course, we'll always recommend to get a soil test if you can. Just so you know what you're dealing with, if you need to amend at all, add any starter fertilizer, compost, anything like that. If you have weed problems, can take care of that right away before you put the seed down. Pull them, whatever you can do. If you're going to use an herbicide, you want to make sure that it has no residual activity, that it, goes away really fast, in other words, so that you're not harming your seed and causing it not to germinate. So just be sure to read the label if you're going to use an herbicide to control weeds ahead of time. You're going to want to loosen about the top foot of the soil with a rototiller or by hand if you have a small area. However you choose to do it, you want to get the top foot pretty loosened, and then also adjust your grade before you actually do the seeding. So you're going to want to have a sloping away from buildings. Absolutely. That's just for the safety of your home and your foundation, and kind of control where the water is going to flow before you get that lawn established. You can mix in any organic matter at this time if you wanted to add, compost or anything like that into the soil. before you seed would be a great time to do it as you're loosening up that top layer. If you want to apply a starter fertilizer, which is a good thing to do when seeding, this would be the time to do it as well. And then you have your seed. And when you buy your seed, it will have a recommended rate at which you should seed. So, so many pounds per so many thousand square feet or whatever, it'll be on the bag, and follow those recommendations. And you'll just want to go ahead and broadcast that seed in 2 directions at the recommended rate. So, walk across your lawn north to south and spread seed, and then walk across your lawn east to west and spread seed. So that just gives you like a better coverage of seed. And then you'll just take a rake and very, very gently drag it over the surface just to cover the seed with soil. You don't want to cover it, bury it too deep or anything like that. So just a really, really light raking is all you need to do. And then you're just going to have to water it. You want to water it lightly. It doesn't need to go deep at this point when the seed is new, but it does need to stay moist. So, that's why it'd be hard right now to keep the soil moist when it's like 100 degrees during the day. You're probably going to have to do like 4 or 5 little waterings throughout the day. So that's why it's kind of easier on those tail ends. But you definitely want to just keep it moist until you see germination. It depends on the species that you're planting, but you're looking maybe like 7 to 21 days to start to see germination. And so you just got to kind of keep an eye on it, keep it real moist until then. And then once you start to see it germinating, very gradually decrease how often you're watering. And, you're going to kind of want to start to go a little bit deeper because now it's growing roots and you want to get a little bit deeper into the soil, but not water quite as much. So that's kind of the goal, is to gradually get to that point. And then there's sodding. So seeding obviously is much cheaper, and it's, I think, a lot less physical work than laying down sod. So those are kind of like the things to consider when you're, and availability. If you specifically really want a certain species and you're not willing to compromise on that, you might have a better time finding it in seed rather than sod. So seeing what you can get in sod is definitely going to play a role too. But that's kind of the pros and cons between seeding and sodding. If you really just want, you've got a little money to spend on it, you got some time and physical abilities to get out there and lay the sod, and you want it to just happen fast, sodding is a great option. And you can install sod anytime during the growing season, really. The one thing is you just want the roots to be well established before the first frost. So, we usually get our first frost like early to mid-October around Pueblo. So, you probably want to do it by mid-September at the latest, early to mid-September to lay your sod. And, who knows, we might get not saying we wouldn't get a September frost, but it's not quite as likely as it is in October. So that's just when you'd want to do it by, but you can do it anytime during the growing season. Before you install the sod, again, adjust the grade. If the soil is really compacted and hard, you're going to want to kind of cultivate that and loosen it up so the roots can penetrate. Definitely would recommend getting a soil test and doing any kind of amending that the soil test would recommend. If you want to add some compost or something like that, we would recommend to go ahead and mix that into the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. You want the soil, when you actually go to install the sod, to be slightly moist. You don't want to lay it on super dry soil, but you also don't want it to be super soggy. So just a nice moist, nice light fluffy soil that you've worked in and watered a little bit. And then you want to keep watering. Once you have the sod laid, water it enough to keep the sod moist and so that the underlying soil is also getting a little bit moist. Definitely don't want it soggy. That's not good, because that will kind of cause the soil to become waterlogged and the roots won't survive and they won't travel down to the soil. So moist but not soggy. That's the goal. It should take about 2 to 3 weeks to root. And you can tell if it's rooted by just giving it a gentle tug, see if it comes up or if it's rooted into the underlying soil. Once it is rooted, once you give it the tug test and see that it's pretty rooted into the underlying soil, You can start to water less frequently, but again, increase the amount of water so that you're kind of getting those roots to grow real nice and deep and getting on a good watering schedule for what will be your mature lawn. Okay, before we move on to watering, I see a few questions in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna read it out loud so everybody knows what I'm answering here. I'm covering my yard with cardboard, then adding soil and mulch on top, hoping to diminish the weeds, then get the benefit from the organic matter that remains under the cardboard as it breaks down. Yeah, that's a really good option. Cardboard will definitely break down into some organic matter for you. And as far as it comes to grading, yeah, you do want to slope away from your buildings, but this is a good point that you do want it to be kind of even. You don't want like basins in the yard so that you're getting pooling happening. So yes, that's a very good point. If you start turf grass after the hottest season, when should preparation begin? And how much time do we have to actually establish a lawn? Can you start a good lawn in late September? I'd say if you're doing sod, that's definitely possible to start a good lawn in late September. Probably a little too late to seed. You're going to want to give it, like I said, depending on the species, possibly up to 21 days to germinate, and then probably a good couple weeks after that to actually get established. So if you're seeding, you'd want to start a little bit sooner than late September. I would say start prepping maybe like mid to late August and then get that seed down early September at the latest. And it's so dependent on the weather too, you never know. But that's probably what I would recommend as far as pushing it the latest as possible. And what else was I going to say about that? Oh, yes. And I think I might have this coming up in my presentation, but any new lawn, even if you just got your seed established or you just laid sod, you got to water a new lawn through the fall and winter. So you're going to have to probably get out there and get your sprinklers turned back on and re-winterize through the fall and winter when we have some nice days, or get out there with the hose and just give it some hand watering. But it's definitely going to need some irrigation through the fall and winter. Okay, so let's talk watering, and specifically, let's start with scheduling. This table comes from a fact sheet that I will send you in the follow-up email. Everyone will get a follow-up email from me with, some further resources, with the slides and with the recording. I will admit I forgot to record the whole first part on the turf species, but I will send you a really good publication that has all of that laid out in text, so you don't need to hear me talk about it. So my apologies, but yes, you will get the recording of most of the class. Okay, so scheduling for watering. Really dependent. A lot of people are asking me about this time of year, like how often, help me schedule my watering, and it's very hard to do from my desk because it just depends on so much. It depends on the species of the turf that you have. It depends on your soil type. Is it very compact and clayey? That's going to hold water longer than a sandy soil where it's going to run right through. Cutting height, longer lawn. If you keep your lawn pretty long, it's going to need water less than if you keep it short. Disease and pest potential kind of goes back to turf species. You don't want to overwater a lawn that has a high potential to get like a fungal disease or something like that. It really depends on the weather as well. I mean, we had a period of time where it was raining every day, and so you wouldn't need to water that much during that time. But then last week it was over 100 degrees for a few days in a row. So that's definitely going to affect how much you need to water. It's kind of a dynamic thing. Sun exposure depends on how shady or sunny your lawn is, and then slopes as well. If you have a slope in your lawn, that's going to need quite a bit more irrigation than a flat part. So there's just so much that goes into it, and it's just good to know these factors and think about them and how they are affecting your lawn and your watering, and then you'll be able to make adjustments from there. And it kind of is something you need to play with. So I would suggest getting an idea in mind, starting out with it, and then going and checking it out. Like, is my lawn staying moist long enough, or is it drying out too soon? How's it looking? And kind of make your adjustments from there. And then, of course, You're going to have to adjust all year long. And, as the weather changes and things like that. One thing that is good to consider to do is a cycle and soak. So a lot of automatic sprinkler systems have this option automatically built in. Otherwise, you can program it manually. But let's say you want to do a total of 20 minutes on your lawn on one zone. It's good if you can do, 10 minutes in that zone, give it like a 5 minute or so break to soak in, and then do the next 10 minutes. That's always good. It's especially good if you have like a thatchy lawn or a compacted soil to let the water soak in a little bit more. And I think most lawns could benefit from a cycle and soak. Rain sensors, a lot of these more kind of fancy programmers have rain sensors that you can go put outside, and then they can tell that it rained, and so they won't turn on, and that helps you save water, and that's great. And it helps you from overwatering. And it's always better to water based on need rather than a schedule. I know you kind of got to schedule your automatic programmer, but it's best to just check in with your lawn and make sure that your schedule that you're setting is actually matching up to the need, rather than just saying like, okay, I'm doing it 3 times a week for 20 minutes no matter what. Just kind of make sure that that's actually working for your situation. And I love this table because it's kind of just gives you a place to start, I think. So up here at the top, it gives you, this is about how much inches of water per week that your lawn needs in these different sections of time. So late April, May and June, July and August, September and early October. That's irrigation plus rain. So, if it's totally rainy October, you might not need to water. But so, the most that you're going to need is around July and August, coming up here real soon when it's real hot and dry. About 1.5 inches is what you'll need. So it kind of also depends if you have pop-up sprayers or rotor sprayers, how many minutes you're going to need to do. The pop-ups tend to deliver more water, more amount of water than the rotor heads do. So you don't have to water for quite as many minutes. But this kind of shows you, I would start with looking at this column, the 100% column. This is your July and August. This is the most minutes that you're going to have to water. So let's say, I'm going to water 2 times per week. So in July and August, it'll be with my pop-up sprayers, I'm going to water for 26 minutes per week. And then a lot of the automatic timers will have it so you can set it for this 100% of July and August, and then there's just a one button that you can push, if yours has this, where you can go down to 67% and 50%, and that makes it kind of easy. So then when you get to September, you set it down to that 67%, and you'll get the 1 inch. And so you can kind of just follow this as a starting point and see how it works for you, and make adjustments from there. And like I said, you'll get this table. So, very generally speaking, the table's kind of gets you deep down into the details and able to get a pretty good custom starting point. But very generally speaking, 1 to 1.5 inches of water per irrigation is what you're shooting for. And you might be wondering, well, how in the heck do I know how many inches of water I'm getting per irrigation? Well, what you can do is set out several shallow containers that are the same, like tuna cans or something like that, and run your system for about 30 minutes. And then you can measure with like a ruler how many inches of water got delivered. And then you'll know how much comes out in 30 minutes, and you can kind of make your adjustments from there. You want to let your soil dry out a little bit and let the lawn indicate to you that it needs water. That's going to kind of train you to train your lawn to be, a little bit more tolerant of that drying out, which is a good thing. And you definitely don't want waterlogged soils. That's going to create a lack of oxygen. Roots need oxygen as well as water. So you're not going to have good growth if you have like super soggy soils. If your lawn does appear stressed on these really hot days and it's an off day for you, just give it a quick 1-2 minutes, even with the hose, just squirt it down, and that should relieve that heat stress. Ideally, you want to water between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Those are the best hours to water because it's cooler. It's usually less windy. You usually have better water pressure because people all around aren't using a lot of water. And it also overlaps with the natural dew time of the lawn. So that cuts down on any chances of insects or mostly diseases, because you're not adding moisture past the dew point. So 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. is what you want to shoot for. And like I said, newer lawns, you got to do some fall and winter watering, or, there's definitely a chance you're going to lose them during the winter and you'll have to start back over in the spring. So keep them watered. You want to wait till it's going to be a string of nice days, which we typically have in the fall and winter. Either go ahead and turn that system back on and give it a good soaking, or drag your hose out and your sprayer and give it a hand watering during those nice days. Okay, let's talk mowing. For all species, this one's easy. It doesn't depend on species, like most of everything we've talked about so far. 2.5 to 3 inches. That's a sweet spot. That's where the height of your grass that you want to shoot for. You go too short, it's going to decrease the heat tolerance. It's going to, burn faster. It won't be as drought tolerant. You'll need to water it more. If it's too long, for one, it becomes hard to mow, especially if it starts to get to the point that it's falling over. And then also your chances of insects and disease increase if you keep it too long. So 2.5 to 3 inches is perfect. As far as how often you should mow, that kind of depends on the time of year and how fast your lawn is growing. But you want to mow often enough so that you're only removing a third of the height in a single mowing. So, during the middle of the summer, if it's growing a lot, that frequency will be more often than on the tail ends of the season when it's not growing quite as much. So, just shoot for only removing about a third of the height in a single mowing. It's really, really good for your lawn to let the grass clippings fall back onto the lawn and not bag them. So definitely do that if you're able, if your situation allows. I know sometimes it's a little frustrating with the dogs and kids tracking in grass all the time, but it is definitely good to do if you're able. It recycles nutrients back into the lawn. It adds organic matter to your lawn, and it's just a great thing to do. And be sure your blades are sharp on your mower. Some species of turf are a little bit sensitive to shredding. So if the blades are dull, they'll kind of shred the grass rather than give it a nice clean cut, and that could cause browning on some species. So you just want to make sure that you're sharpening your lawnmower blades every so often. Let's see. I'm gonna go through this and then I'll get some questions answered. As far as maintenance goes, power raking and aerating are kind of the two things that come to mind. A shallow power raking can be beneficial if you do it often, especially if you have a really wet, matted turf and you just want to get it up and get it green. You can do a power raking. A deep power raking is kind of usually more damaging than beneficial. So you don't want to do like a really deep power raking or hire a company that's just going to go too crazy on the power raking. The much, much better thing to do is to have it core cultivated, also known as aerated. That's a fantastic thing to do for your lawn. You should do it yearly. If you have a very compacted soil, you should do it twice a year. Best to be done in the spring and in the fall, or in the fall. It relieves that soil compaction. If you have a compacted soil, it lets oxygen start to enter. If you have a thatchy lawn, so thatch is a layer that grows between the living grass and the soil of kind of like a dead plant material. That's what thatch is. I've referred to that a couple times. So aerating will kind of control some thatch accumulation, and it's a really good thing to do if you do need to just maybe you want to thicken your lawn up a little bit, you want to add a little bit of seed, just do a little bit of overseeding. Really good to aerate first, because then the seed can actually contact the soil in those little holes. And it's also really good to do it right before you fertilize so that the fertilizer can get down into those little holes. Now there will be these little cores of dirt on the lawn afterward. So if you have a company do it, they probably might be able to charge you like a small fee to rake up the cores. It's personal preference. You don't have to. They'll eventually disintegrate. It, depending on a lot of different factors, it might take a few days to a few weeks for them to completely disintegrate. You can mow over them for sure, but it might dull your blades out a little bit. So you'll want to sharpen them up after that. But I would definitely recommend to everybody to have your lawn aerated at least once a year. Let me go ahead and check the chat here. Cool. Yeah. So some good comments in there. If you guys want to check those out, definitely if you keep the lawn too short, yeah, weeds can definitely take over. That's a good point. Okay, fertilizing. Nitrogen is definitely the most important nutrient that we're going to have to consider when it comes to fertilizing our lawns. And any fertilizer that you buy is going to have some nitrogen in it for sure. This is a table. Table will be sent to you, so don't worry. You should follow this guidance as far as timing, amount, and then of course it shows you kind of depending on which species you're dealing with. So you don't want to over fertilize. That's not good for the environment because it runs off into the runoff water, and that's not good. And also it can cause more thatch buildup. It'll just cause you to have to mow more, and there's just really no reason to do it. So don't over fertilize. But then on the same hand, if you have like a bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass or a ryegrass, they will definitely need to be fertilized or they will become unhealthy, not look good, potentially succumb to any kind of problems. So got to find a happy medium. If you don't really want to fertilize, consider one of those low maintenance lawns that we talked about. If you're putting on nitrogen fertilizer, but your lawn isn't really responding, it might be lacking something else. So that's when we would definitely suggest to get a soil test, or else it's just a guessing game from there. If you buy a balanced or a complete lawn fertilizer, which you can get at any garden center or big box store, that's kind of the best safeguard against nutrient deficiencies because it's got a little bit of everything. So that will be the best bet if you don't want to get the soil test. Now you'll see this little note down here at the bottom that the March-April nitrogen application may not be needed if you fertilized in this September to November range here at the end of the table. So if it's greening up good and stuff, it's best to delay the fertilizing and do your first fertilizing in May to mid-June. That's better to do it in the fall than to do it in the early spring. If you do recycle your clippings, which you're not bagging them, you're just letting them fall back onto the lawn, you can reduce these rates, these nitrogen rates, by 1/4 to 1/3 because you're recycling nutrients onto your lawn, so you don't need quite as much fertilizer. Okay, so let's talk renovation. Maybe you have lawn, but it's thinning, it's spotty, it's just having some issues, it's not looking great to you. Maybe it's time to consider renovating. So you can kind of kill your existing turf, either using a chemical if you'd like to, or if you would like to cover it with like plastic or cardboard or something and kill it that way. If wouldn't really be considered renovation if you were tilling and adjusting grade, then you're just kind of starting from scratch. But you can also just introduce a new or an improved species into an existing species. So let's say you have a bluegrass lawn, it's thin, not looking great. You want to maybe introduce some ryegrass into it. You can just slowly start to seed in some ryegrass, and that's fine to do. And it's totally fine to have a mixed lawn. I think mixes look awesome. It's more resistant to diseases and stuff because you've got different types of grass in there. So it's a good thing to do for sure. So what you're going to want to do if you didn't kill your existing turf is go ahead and aerate. That's definitely important. And then seed with an appropriate species. So what's appropriate? Well, here's a little table I made. You can seed ryegrass into bluegrass. You can seed fine fescue into bluegrass. You shouldn't seed tall fescue into bluegrass. They just look too different and they don't mix well. You don't want to seed a cool season grass into a warm season grass or vice versa. So you don't want to seed buffalo grass into bluegrass, ryegrass, or tall fescue, and or the opposite, because they're just too different. The cool season grasses and the warm season grasses, you can't make both of them happy when they're growing in the same lawn. So you don't want to do that. But these are some options here that you can do. So go ahead and aerate, put down a seed, apply a starter fertilizer, keep it moist, pretty consistently moist, which will be easier to do if you already have some lawn going on there. Mow it once the grass is about 2.5 inches, take it down a little bit, and then try to keep the traffic low until it's been mowed a couple of times. And that is a good way to just kind of start to renovate your lawn. And honestly, we've done some lawn renovation at our house, and it's taken a couple seasons, of aerating and overseeding and being patient until it kind of starts to really thicken up and look good. So if you've got some time and it's like you have a lawn, but you just want it to be a better lawn, it's a good thing maybe like, every fall to go ahead and do that process, or every spring and every fall if you feel like it. Okay, before we get into troubleshooting, let's check the chat. Okay, I was letting my grass go to seed this year, but it seems like it's taking a long time for the seed to drop, and now the grass is really long. Yeah, that'll happen. Should I mow it and hope some of the seed will germinate, or should I leave it until later and then mow? Deb, I would say go ahead and mow it. I think it'd be better to mow it and hope some of the seed germinates than let it get too long, and it's falling over. It's hard to mow. You're having to remove too much at once. So yeah, I'd say go ahead and try to and mow it sooner rather than later, and hopefully later in the season that'll happen faster for you. Tried to plant a native grass seed mix last June, July, but the ants carried off 90% of the seed. Darn it. Try to seed a native grass. Is there a better time? Man, it seems like that specific problem could probably be happen at any time of the year, unfortunately. So I mean, the June July timeframe is usually a pretty good time frame. You could try to go for a native grass seed. I would maybe go mid-May. You could start it a little earlier, or maybe early August, but that's really the sweet spot that you did it, and that's just an unfortunate problem that I'm not sure what you could really do about. Darn it. Maybe try to control ants first and then do it. Want to fill in some holes in my bluegrass with sod. Is it too hot right now to do that? No, I mean, it is hot, but you'll just have to water it a little bit extra. You can definitely throw down some sod right now, and just, you want to keep the sod and the underlying soil moist, but not soggy. You can definitely go ahead and do that now. Yeah, spray for ants before you start seed. That's what I was kind of thinking too there, Michael. Maybe do some ant control and then put down the seed. Might be helpful. Okay, so let's talk troubleshooting. Not going to get too deep into troubleshooting because troubleshooting, especially for insects and diseases, is difficult for sure. It's really hard to tell what exactly might be causing a problem that you're having in your lawn. I'll give you guys some ideas of where to start, but we're just going to do a very high level coverage of troubleshooting. So weeds. Everybody usually calls and says like, oh, what can I spray on my lawn to kill these weeds? Because that's the easy thing to do, right? Well, weed killers are only temporary if we're not addressing the factor that's causing us to have weeds in the first place. So that's something to definitely consider is, don't just go straight for that weed killer. Let's try to figure out why you're getting so many weeds. So it might be a lot of times, very often, it's that your soil is compacted. So aeration can help with weeds. Keeping your lawn a little bit longer can help with weeds. Trying to cut back how often you water and just doing it more deeply and infrequently. And if maybe you might be over fertilizing a little bit. So limiting your fertilizer can also help. Like I said, soil compaction is like more than half the time the cause. So try to just, a good aeration should help. Now if you do need to use a spray, and you have a broadleaf perennial weed, such as a dandelion, the fall is the best time to treat. Late spring would be the second best time. And you want to look for these 3 ingredients. You'll get these slides, so don't worry, you'll have them listed. But 2,4-D, dicamba, or MCPP can be used on broadleaf weeds in a lawn and won't theoretically hurt the lawn. It is best to spot treat though, just to be safe. You don't want to spray it all over your whole lawn. It's best to go out and kind of just spray the actual weeds that are growing. You don't want to apply any kind of herbicide to sod until about 4 to 5 weeks after you planted it. If you have grassy weeds, like say you have tall fescue growing in your bluegrass or Bermuda grass or crabgrass or something like that, that's a little harder because these chemicals right here will go for broadleaf weeds but don't hurt grasses. But when your weed is also a grass, there's not really a lot that you can do that's going to just affect the weed. It's also going to kill the grass if you spray something on it. So there is like one ingredient of a chemical that can be sprayed on things like crabgrass and stuff like that, or tall fescue. It's only allowable for like a certified professional person to spray it. So you'd have to call a lawn care company and ask if they have anything like that. It's not something you could buy and do yourself. So if you have grassy weeds and you want to handle it yourself, you can either dig them up and have those bare spots that way, or you can spray a non-selective, oops, that shouldn't say fertilizer, that should say a non-selective herbicide, my mistake, and kill them that way, and then overseed or sod to fill in your bare spots. So those are kind of not the best options. I know people don't really like to hear those are their only options for grassy weeds, but that's really all you can do if you want them out of there. Insects and disease. So compared to other parts of the country, here in Colorado, especially here in Pueblo, insect and disease problems are very minimal compared to other places. So that's good. It's often, if you're having a problem, it's not an insect or disease, it's something else. So that's good. Don't overuse insecticides. Don't just like assume that it's an insect and spray without knowing what you're spraying for. A lot of times it can make the problem worse because you're giving any insects that might be there a resistance, and it could also harm birds, and it's just not good to overuse chemicals in any way. If you do end up using an insecticide, they usually need to be watered in. If you have a very thatchy lawn, that can kind of hinder it. So again, aeration would help. Fungicides are typically not effective. If you have a fungal issue, probably best to just adjust your fertilization, decrease your water, do some aeration, increase your oxygen levels, something like that. So that's that. Not there, like, usually, even if people think it's an insect or disease problem, it's usually not. And you know what it usually is an irrigation coverage issue. Even if you think like, no, my sprinklers are covering this whole lawn, I know it, check and see. Put out a container on the brown spot, put out a container on a green spot, and see if it's getting as much water. Even if it's just getting, a tenth of an inch less over time, that's a lot. So, you'll have to adjust your coverage. And that is, probably 90% of the time, the reason people have brown spots in their lawn is an irrigation coverage issue. There's a lot of causes, but that's just the most common one. Rarely it can be necrotic green spot, where you kind of get this like green frog-eyed center, they call it, with a yellow outside ring. It could be dog urine spots. If that's the case, that your dog's kind of going in the same spot over and over and over, you can kind of just dilute that with water, give that an extra spray with the hose every once in a while. Mites can cause brown spots. Watering well and watering during the fall and winter will help you to combat the mites if that is something you've dealt with in the past. They like it hot and dry. So okay, this is my information. If you want to get a hold of me with any problems, my email address is there. The Pueblo County Master Gardeners have this email address here if you'd like to send them any questions. And follow our Facebook page we're always posting lots of informational posts. We advertise all of our classes on there, all of our events, share a lot of cool gardening, horticulture related stuff from the community and beyond. So definitely follow us on Facebook. Check out our page if you are on that social media platform. And let's keep those questions coming in the chat now if you've got anything. Let's see. Can rabbits cause those brown spots, or is it the male dog always? Actually, it's kind of a common misconception. It could be the male or a female dog. And yes, rabbits can also. So that might be another thing that you're dealing with. And if it's a urine issue, just diluting with water is really the only thing you can do other than excluding the animal from the area. What else? What other questions do we have? Feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. All right, cool. I'm gonna hang on for a few more minutes, and so if anything comes up in the chat or you want to talk, feel free to stick around. If not, the class is over. You will be getting a